I had already done enough work to tire a stouter man, and was only too glad to throw myself on the sand above the tide and rest, for the sun was already up and pouring a generous warmth over the land. While my state could have been worse, I was on the wild coast of a foreign country, and not entirely secure in my property, as I soon found out. I had not been long on the shore when I heard the patter-patter of a horse's feet approaching along the hard beach, which ceased as it came abreast of the sand ridge where I lay sheltered from the wind. Looking up cautiously, I saw, mounted on a nag, probably the most astonished boy on the whole coast. He had found a sloop. It must be mine, he thought, for am I not the first to see it on the beach? Sure enough, there it was, all high and dry and painted white. He trotted his horse around it, and finding no owner, hitched the nag to the sloop's bobstay, and hauled as though he would take her home. But of course she was too heavy for one horse to move. With my skiff, however, it was different. This he hauled some distance, and concealed behind a dune in a bunch of tall grass. He had made up his mind, I dare say, to bring more horses and drag his bigger prize away, and was starting off for the settlement a mile or so away for the reinforcement when I discovered myself to him, at which he seemed displeased and disappointed. "Buenos dias, muchacho," I said. He grunted a reply, and eyed me keenly from head to foot. Then, bursting into a volley of questions, more than 6 Yankees could ask, he wanted to know, first, where my ship was from, and how many days she had been coming. Then he asked what I was doing here ashore so early in the morning. "Your questions are easily answered," I replied. "My ship is from the moon. It has taken her a month to come, and she is here for a cargo of boys." But the intimation of this enterprise, had I not been on the alert, might have cost me dearly. For while I spoke, this child of the Campo coiled his lariat ready to throw, and instead of being himself carried to the moon, he was apparently thinking of towing me home by the neck, astern of his wild cayuse, over the fields of Uruguay. The exact spot where I was stranded was at the Castillo Chicos, about 7 miles south of the dividing line of Uruguay and Brazil, and of course the natives there speak Spanish. To reconcile my early visitor, I told him that I had on my ship biscuits, and that I wished to trade them for butter and milk. On hearing this, a broad grin lighted up his face, and showed that he was greatly interested, and that even in Uruguay a ship's biscuit will cheer the heart of a boy, and make him your bosom friend. The lad almost flew home, and returned quickly with butter, milk, and eggs. I was, after all, in a land of plenty. With the boy came others, old and young, from neighbouring ranches, among them a German settler who was of great assistance to me in many ways. A coast guard from Fort Teresa, a few miles away, also came, to protect your property from the natives of the plains, he said. I took occasion to tell him, however, that if he would look after the people of his own village, I would take care of those from the plains, pointing as I spoke to the nondescript merchant who had already stolen my revolver and several small articles from my cabin, which by a bold front I had recovered. The chap was not a native Uruguayan. Here, as in many other places that I visited, the natives themselves were not the ones discreditable to the country. Early in the day, a dispatch came from the port captain of Montevideo, commanding the coastguards to render the Spray every assistance. This, however, was not necessary, for a guard was already on the alert, and making all the ado that would become the wreck of a steamer with 1,000 emigrants aboard. The same messenger brought word from the port captain that he would dispatch a steam tug to tow the Spray to Montevideo. The officer was as good as his word. A powerful tug arrived on the following day. But to make a long story short, with the help of the German and one soldier, and one Italian called Angel of Milan, I had already floated the sloop, and was sailing for port with the boom off before a fair wind. The adventure cost the Spray no small amount of pounding on the hard sand. She lost her shoe and part of her false keel, and received other damage, which, however, was readily mended afterward in dock. On the following day, I anchored at Maldonado. The British consul, his daughter, and another young lady came on board, bringing with them a basket of fresh eggs, strawberries, bottles of milk, and a great loaf of sweet bread. This was a good landfall, and better cheer than I had found at Maldonado once upon a time, when I had entered the port with a stricken crew in my bark, the Equidneck. In the waters of Maldonado Bay a variety of fishes abound, and fur seals in their season haul out on the island abreast the bay to breed. Currents on this coast are greatly affected by the prevailing winds, and a tidal wave higher than that ordinarily produced by the moon is sent up the whole shore of Uruguay before a south-west gale, and lowered by a north-easter, as may happen. One of these waves having just receded before the north-east wind which brought the Spray in, left the tide now at low ebb, with oyster rocks laid bare for some distance along the shore. Other shellfish of good flavour were also plentiful, though small in size. I gathered a mess of oysters and mussels here, while a native with hook and line, and with mussels for bait, fished from a point of detached rock for bream, landing several good-sized ones. The fisherman's nephew, a lad about 7 years old, deserves mention as the tallest blasphemer for a short boy that I met on the voyage. He called his uncle all the vile names under the sun for not helping him across the gully, while he swore roundly in all the moods and tenses of the Spanish language. His uncle fished on, now and then congratulating his hopeful nephew on his accomplishment. At the end of his rich vocabulary, the urchin sauntered off into the fields, and shortly returned with a bunch of flowers, and with all smiles handed them to me with the innocence of an angel. I remembered having seen the same flowers on the banks of the river farther up some years before. I asked the young pirate why he had brought them to me. Said he, "I don't know, I only wished to do so." Whatever the influence was that put so amiable a wish in this wild pampa boy, it must be far-reaching, thought I, and potent, seas over. Shortly after, the Spray sailed for Montevideo, where she arrived on the following day, and was greeted by steam whistles till I felt embarrassed and wished that I had arrived unobserved. The voyage so far alone may have seemed to the Uruguayans a feat worthy of some recognition. But there was so much of it yet ahead, and of such an arduous nature, that any demonstration at this point seemed somehow like boasting prematurely.